This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own moves. Carrington, North are in front.
Hello and welcome back to North Pod. We are in the postseason officially now. The finals have started and we are not playing. But plenty of footy still to watch. Obviously, the AFLW is well underway and there's still 3 rounds of finals left. So plenty of footy on, but none of the AFL men North Melbourne out there playing, unfortunately. But I've certainly been watching the finals closely, and it, whets the appetite for when we might potentially get back there in the next few years, hopefully. And the women are going fantastic. It looks like they're going to play some finals footy in later in the year, so we will talk about that. On today's episode, we're going to be doing a bit of a player review over the next couple of weeks. So I'm going to split it in half, work my way backwards through the numbers. So this episode, we're going to cover player jumper number 46, so Robert Hansen Jr., all the way back to 24, Tom Powell. And then next podcast, we'll look from Ben Mackay, 23, up to Jack Marnie, 1. So we'll cover 23 players in each episode. And this is the gist of what we're going to do. And I think it's going to come across as harsh at times, but let me just lay it out. I'm going to give each player a score out of 10 for the season. Now, here's kind of my thoughts around it. I will consider VFL form loosely, but certainly the AFL form is the priority. So if a player spent most of the year in the VFL, they've maybe played a couple of AFL games, I'll look at the body of work, but probably goes without saying that they're not going to score super high. 5 is the pass mark, but it's nothing more. So I know oftentimes with the review scales, it's really like if you're not getting 8 or 9 out of 10, you're garbage. That's not what I'm doing here. There's going to be a lot of fails. And I think, you've got to look at the fact that we finished second last, so there should be lots of players that didn't play well, if that makes sense. I'm going to try and make it as expectationless as possible. But there's always that, obviously a much better player I'm expecting a bit more from. I think it's hard to completely take that out of it, but I'm going to try to just look at how good was their season, not necessarily thinking about what it should have been. It's going to take into account where they started the year though. So what I mean by that is if they've shown some development, that's a good thing. If they have regressed or they haven't shown development, that's a bad thing. So I guess that's where I'm kind of saying there's a little bit of expectation in there, but as I said, I'm trying to keep that mostly objective. And obviously it goes without saying it's a look from the outside. There's going to be stuff that, someone from the outside like myself I'm not aware of, like with injuries or what the coach is actually asking them to do. But we can only judge on what we can see. So that's what we're going to have a go at. It's going to seem harsh, and you'll certainly see that across this first batch of players. It's going to seem very harsh, but it's a brutal, honest session. We've got to review the season, and I think if anything, it proves the point around why we are where we are. I think when we go through this. Now, obviously, the first lot, because it's that 46 to 23 or 24. A lot of these players are more so the fringe players just because of how the jumper numbers tend to work. Not all of them, but quite a few will be that. So that's what we're going to be having a look at. So without further ado, I've wasted plenty of time already. Let's jump in. At number 46, Robert Hansen Jr. Obviously picked him up in the mid-season draft, so hasn't had much of a chance to show his wares. 2 games, he was subbed off in one of them. Didn't really show much at AFL level. Didn't kick a goal. Looked like he was too easily pushed around. But had a couple of good games in the VFL, I would say. Showed a bit of promise. Had a couple of games where he kicked multiple goals. So, and it's that challenging thing where he is that sort of player that we're hoping is going to be we're looking for that kind of player. Now, whether or not it becomes him, we'll see, but he's the kind of player that we're looking for. I've given him a 2 out of 10. So as you can see, it's harsh, but obviously he didn't show us much. He showed us a bit, but we're going to need to see some development next year. And after preseason, and he's had some time to adjust, I think, expectations might change. There's been some talk around maybe that he's just left the club and we won't see him next year on Twitter. That might be the case, I'm not sure, but I'm going off the facts. He's contracted for next year because generally those players that are picked up in that mid-season draft get a 1.5-year contracts. They get the rest of the year that they are drafted and then the following year. So he is contracted. We'll have to let him go. We'll have to agree to let him go if that was the case. So a 2 out of 10 for Robert Hansen Jr. I'd like to see him back next year and just see what he can do. Number 45, Hamish Free. He didn't play a game in the AFL. Probably played about half the year in the VFL and then was injured with a shoulder and didn't play pretty much the second half of the year. He's a rookie. He's 25. He's there as insurance for our rucks, or he was this year. He looked not bad at times in the VFL, but I don't know if I know he's not part of our genuine AFL plans at the moment. But all of that could change in the draft period and in terms of what our ruck stocks look like for next year. So pretty hard to judge him. Again, I've given him a 2, and obviously that's just based really on his VFL form. I thought he did show a bit in the VFL. I certainly don't watch the VFL as closely as I watch the AFL, but I saw a bit of his work and he looked solid. Expectations are low for Hamish. We picked him up as a rookie, a mature age rookie, but a ruck, like whatever. If he doesn't make it, he doesn't make it, but you've got to have some ruck security on your bench, and that's what he was for us at this first half of the year. All right, here's our first genuine A-grader, so to speak, Cam Zerha, 44. So he had 16 games this year, kicked 20 goals, averaged 16 disposals, which was 4 higher than his career average. Thought that he started the season really strongly, but sort of tailed off later on in terms of his scoreboard impact, and a couple of our forwards were like that. Jaden Stevenson, who we'll look at next week, was pretty similar. I thought his best games were the Essendon game in round 12, where he really kept us in the game. He kicked 4 goals from 12 touches, and if it wasn't for his second half in that game, we wouldn't have gotten close. He was really exceptional in that game. He also kicked 3 goals 4 against Carlton from 17 touches. That was much earlier in the year, that Good Friday game. So he had a couple of great games, had 6 games where he kicked multiple goals and 4 games where he had 20 or more touches. So you can see that kind of development in that he was finding more of the ball because he was playing a bit more midfield time. There were those games where he was able to kick multiple goals, but there was also games, particularly late, where he just didn't have that scoreboard impact. And part of that was injury and part of that was form, I think. I think a big part with Cam is just we've got to decide what role we want for him. Do we want to try and have him as that hybrid Dustin Martin, Jordan De Goey type role where he really splits his time between the midfield and the forward line, or is he a permanent forward? And I don't know. I do think because of the amount of medium forwards and midfielders we have, it's a really tough thing, because it's not like you can say, well, obviously we're more deficit in this area of the ground, let's put him there. There's a lot of both those type of players, but he is a really strong-bodied player, which is something that I think our midfield needs. So I don't mind seeing him going through there, but he's got to be hitting the scoreboard, I think. So yeah, a solid season, but not an amazing season. I gave him a 6, so I did give him a pass mark. I would have loved to see him play a little bit better in the second half of the year before he got his injury, but it's what it's always been for Zerha. It's consistency and building that unselfishness. I think he had a bit more of that as the season went on. I just want to see him contribute more across each game. He really goes in and out of it, because as I said, that match against Essendon that he kept in the second half, he'd had a super quiet first half and then really burst onto the scene. So consistency across the game, consistency across the season, but not a bad season from Cam with those 20 goals. So still more than a goal a game, which is not bad. Number 43, Aaron Hall, one of our retirees for this season. Only managed the 6 games, averaged 23 disposals, 5.8 marks, 430 metres gained. It was that middle part of the year where he played. He started the year in the VFL. He played a bit through the middle and then found his way out of the side and ended up retiring before the season was over. But he was part of that really good run against sort of Sydney and Essendon through the middle. Only played the VFL after that and then sort of retired a month or so out from the end of the season. I think when you look at Aaron Hall, it's, he's played for 5 seasons at North, and I think in the end, he was that classic player where he's filled a gap, but he hasn't filled it perfectly. Like, he was really good at transitioning the ball from the back line to the forward line. He was erratic at times, but he had that capability to do so. He was a bit of a liability defensively sometimes, and I think that's the challenge with some of those mature age players or those players that you get in a trade. Like, they're always going to have some kind of deficiency if their club really hasn't wanted them. There's going to be something that they don't do super well. I thought he really gave it a crack. He played some good footy, and at the end of the day, end of 2018, we gave up pick 68 to get him. So whilst he didn't set the world on fire at North, I think he was worth the risk at pick 68. Like, it's such a late pick that I think it's reasonable that you're not expecting much. I thought, given his season, I've given him a 4. Ultimately, he's just the wrong age profile for where we're at the moment. He's a ball magnet at VFL level and he's capable at AFL level on his day, but he's just not the kind of player that we need at the moment. He was depth, but I think it's time that we move on from some of those older depth players. Because and he had only one of his 6 games was he under 20 touches, but he wasn't able to do enough defensively, and too often his kicking was erratic. He really would have patches where he was firing off 45-meter bullets, and he'd also have those periods where just it seems like he was hitting every kick off his shin. So a 4 for Hawley. I think he played really well at VFL level, and potentially at another club he would have got more games, not because we're so filled with talent, but because we just needed to develop players, and that meant that we weren't able to play him, essentially. Number 42, Callan Dawson. This is an interesting one. Played the last 4 games of 2022 and then had to wait until the last round this year for his chance, which was interesting. I think right up until that point, I didn't expect to see him on the list next year. So he must have been really out of favour, or we're just being ultra patient with him. I'm not sure. I don't know what the reason was, because there was definitely times where we could have used a player like him with Mackay out at the start of the year, Logue missing the second half. We tried Bonner earlier in the year, and that didn't look great. So it was surprising that he didn't get a game earlier. I really liked what he brought in that game against Gold Coast. Admittedly, it's one game at the end of the year where Gold Coast season was over, but I thought he played a fantastic defensive game. I mean, at 196, he's a decent size. He needs a little bit extra bulk to contend with those big boys, and he's 25 years old, so he's unlikely to be able to put on or change his body profile too much, but he does need a little bit more weight. He's still quite slight. I think based on the uncertainty around what our key defensive stocks look like, I think he should stick around. It'll probably depend on what we do in the trade and the drafting space as to whether or not we do keep him. But I think, he's that kind of player that potentially he could be a great second defender, in the right setup and with the right support. So, yeah, I don't think it's over for him. We've only been on our list for a year and a half. So there's still time for him, I think. I've given him a 3, which seems, pretty generous given he only played the one game. But as I said, played a great game. I thought, he probably deserved a bit more of an opportunity, and he had some really decent VFL showings. So it's just around whether he can translate that to the AFL. We know it's not always easy for some people. So, yeah, we'll just have to wait and see if he does stick around and whether or not he can get a more consistent game next year. Number 41, Blake Drury. 4 games, one of those he was subbed out, one of them he was the sub. So only 2 full games for Blake and 2 half games or part games. I thought that first game that he played against the Saints, he played a great first half. And then after that, he kind of faded out of that game and wasn't able to impact against Port or the Swans in the following weeks. and then he got his chance in round 23 as the sub. Just a classic, we've got to figure out where he plays because he's played a bit of medium defender, a bit of medium forward, but he does need to find more of the footy wherever he's been played. I think, he had 13 touches against the Saints and then 7 against Port and 6 and 3 in his other games where he was off and on a bit. He's just that classic midfielder at underage level that needs to adjust and find a role for himself at AFL level. But again, he's a rookie, so his expectations are low. I think it sounds like he's a great clubman. He was captain of the Vic Metro side in his draft year, so he's certainly got some leadership skills and got some talent, but it's whether or not he can translate that to AFL level, which is, I guess, what I talked about with Callan Dawson too. I've given him a 3, only 2 full games, so it's pretty hard to judge his AFL capacity, but his impact at AFL level was virtually 0. Again, similar to Callan, I thought he played some good VFL footy. Didn't light it on fire, but I'd say he definitely earned his spot. I think he's going to need some luck long term to stick around, but he does seem like a ripper bloke. And when I say stick around, he's been given another rookie contract for next year, so we know he's on the list. As we know, most rookies don't make it long term. So I do have concerns about him given his height and his profile, but I thought he showed enough to give him at least one more year and see if he can develop his game any further. So a 3 for Blake. Eddie Ford, number 40. Finally played in a win in game 22 for Eddie Ford. And I think it's probably fair to say this was his breakout year. He played 14 games, having only played 3 last year and 5 the year before. And once he got in mid-year, he really, held that spot. I don't think he's completely fully established yet, but he didn't look like getting dropped once he was in, I suppose I would say. So the chance, or the spot is his to lose next year. 2 hauls of 3 goals against the Suns and the D's showed his forward potential, and I think his marking around the ground was really good. He averaged nearly 5 marks a game, which for a player in his position is elite. So really good marking and capable of kicking multiple goals. Improved his average for all major statistical areas, so like disposals, goals, marks, tackles, all of those kind of big hitters. He improved his career average. It's going to be interesting to see if we play him more wing or half forward when we're full strength, because we know we've got a plethora of those medium forwards, and we've got a couple of wings that, we're sort of toying with, I guess. So I think he can play either of those spots, but I do wonder if maybe the wing is where he settles just based on our profile. But it was a fantastic year from Eddie Ford. I've given him a 6. So as you can see, it's just, it's not, I'm trying to go no expectations. How's he played? And I think him and Zerha are pretty similar. I think we were just happier with Eddie Ford because of, we've got expectations around Cam. Eddie certainly performed above my expectations. He took his chance when he came in. I really hope that he's a starter for round 1, but it's going to be interesting because obviously we're expecting a fair bit of list change between then and now. But I'm feeling really positive about his place in the side. He had a super year. Someone who I don't think had a super year was Flynn Perez, number 39. Just the 5 games, and it felt as though, to me, it was a bit of a let's have one last look at him, particularly late in the year. I thought last year he had showed some positive signs. He played 16 games, but this year just the 5, and he wasn't able to replicate that at all this year. Averaged 10 disposals, 3.4 marks, 1.8 tackles, 170 metres gained, all really on the low side for a small, medium defender. Look, his 2 ACL injuries are a factor. That doesn't help, but I just really thought his footy smarts looked average at times this year. I don't think he made too many glaring errors. I can remember a couple of missed kicks, but, like the North Melbourne side specialised in those this year, so that wasn't specific to him. I just don't think he did too much to cement his spot in the side at all, and that's reflected in his 5 games. I'm giving him a 2. I think I'm ready to move past Flynn Perez and potentially look at someone else in that spot next year. I just don't think, unfortunately, in his 4 years, he's shown enough. Look, we'll see. We'll see if he's the sort of player that gets another year. Again, it's going to depend on what the draft and trade period looks like for us. But I wasn't impressed with his year, and I personally wouldn't probably be expecting to see him next year, unfortunately. Number 38, Tristan Xerri. What an interesting player we have here. Injury interrupted, obviously. Went down in round 1, and it really looked like he was going to be a big factor in the ruck for the year. Unfortunately, he didn't get back until round 17, and then he played the rest of the year at that point. I think what it's important to remember with Tristan is he's only played 33 AFL games now. So 2018, 2019 didn't play a game. 2020 he played 4 games. 21 he played 8. Last year he played 12, and then he played 9 this year. So yeah, he's only played 33. He's still a developing ruckman. He's not young, but he's also, I'd say, coming into that prime age for a ruckman at 24. So he had average 11.5 disposals, 3 clearances, 24.5 hitouts, 6 of those, or 25.5 hitouts, sorry, 6 of those going to advantage. And that's pretty much average for a ruckman. Serviceable, he gets the job done, but I think some North fans are maybe comparing him to Goldie and what we've had over the past decade or so, and that's probably not fair on Tristan because he's still a young, developing AFL ruckman. That being said, there's still things he needs to add to his game. Like, his marking is a big concern for me at the moment. He's only averaged 1 a game this year, and only once did he have more than 2. He had 3 marks against Geelong, and every other game he's either had 1 or 0. So we definitely need him to add that to his game if possible. I think he deserves a solid run at it next year and see if he can do it solo with Comben or Coleman Jones supporting him from the forward line. But I think playing him and Goldie in the same side doesn't suit him, and it doesn't suit us moving forward. We know that Goldie's not going to be here for much longer, if at all. So, yeah, I thought for him, I gave him a 4. I thought he showed glimpses of potential in the ruck and forward, but he really needs to work on his ruck craft and his marking around the ground. I do think he'll be better when he's not sharing with Goldie, but yeah, I want to keep the faith. I want to give him another chance. He only kicked the 3 goals this year, but I do think he's got a bit of forward craft. I'm not saying, he's going to kick 40 or 50 goals for the year, but I could see him maybe averaging a goal a game potentially, or just under the right circumstances. So, yeah, a 4 for Xerri. I want to see more, but I mean, we're going to keep him around for sure. Our ruck stocks are so limited. It's more around what we do with the other rucks, I think, that interests me. 37, Cooper Harvey. For me, a bit of a surprise debutant this year, given we picked him up at 56 in the draft last year. It's obviously a quite late pick, so he wasn't considered to be one of the major talents in the draft. Played a great debut game against Geelong, had 10 disposals, 6 marks, 5 of those were contested, 3 tackles, kicked a goal. And yeah, I mean, he wasn't bad against the Hawks the next weekend either. But just the 3 games in total, and obviously played quite a bit in the VFL, and then went in for surgery at the end of the year, so missed the last couple of games, but showed he can really compete at the level. I do worry that he is a very similar type to our other small, medium marking forwards like Paul Curtis, Eddie Ford, Cam Zerha. We've got a lot of players in that bracket that are quite similar, so I think competition for spots is going to be interesting. But I think, the 3 games of exposure that he had this year probably has to help. He just needs to hit the scoreboard. So I'd say that's potentially why he wasn't selected after round 19. Gave him a 3, just the 3 games, showed a bit. We'll look to play more games next year and try to hit the scoreboard, but he's been able to do that at VFL level. So again, it's just translating that, or whether he can translate that from VFL level to AFL level. But a 3 for Cooper. Phoenix Spicer, 36. 6 games, averaged 6.5 disposals, 3.5 tackles, and kicked 1 goal too. So that, I think, tells the story of our small, medium forwards. He's another one that just hasn't been able to hit the scoreboard this year. Only hit double digits for disposals once, and that was when he had 10 against the Swans. He had some good tackling games and some games where really he was only able to corral. So For example, the game against Essendon, he had 9 tackles, and against Sydney, he had 6 tackles, but then he had 1 against Port Adelaide and none against Collingwood. So it's just the consistency that hurts him. And honestly, from his 12 total AFL games, he really hasn't been able to impact enough on the games or to score enough goals. He's got 2 career goals from his 12 games, which as a small forward, isn't going to cut it. He hasn't been dominant at VFL level either. I think it's important to note that he wasn't, busting down the door. He was given an opportunity and, wasn't really able to grab it with 2 hands. He's like Robert Hansen Jr. He's exactly the type of player that we need, but he just hasn't been able to be that player for it yet. So he's been on the list for 3 years. I think he's going to struggle to stay on the list. He might get another year, but I haven't seen enough from him to convince me that he can do it, unfortunately. I gave him a 2. He didn't have a breakout game. He got a nice solid run of 6 games to try and show something, but he just hasn't developed into the player that we've hoped yet. So a 2 out of 10, obviously a disappointing score, and one to watch for a potential delisting depending on what happens with the next couple of weeks. Number 35, Charlie Lazaro. Only able to muster 6 games this year, and several of those were as the sub. He was able to play 12 over the past couple of years, like 12 in 2022 and 12 in 2021, so 6 would have been a disappointing output for him. He really struggled for impact in all of those games except the last one where he played against the Gold Coast. He had 26 disposals, 4 tackles in that game and looked fantastic, but he was playing as a midfielder. And he just seems to be last in that midfield pecking order at the moment. He wasn't able to play anywhere else on the field with impact, so half forward he really struggled to get himself involved. And when he came on as the sub, he really struggled to get into the flow of the game and have an impact. He didn't look like a fresh sub that was going to tear apart everyone else. He didn't play bad against Geelong. He had 15 disposals and 10 tackles. That was the only other game where I thought he was okay. But we can see that he's able to transition the ball and he's able to spread. It's just a question of whether or not he's strong and versatile enough as a player. He is contracted for next year, so I'm not expecting to see him delisted, and I can't imagine that he's got any trade value. So unless we're trying to pick up some late picks for points, I can't see him being traded. So I gave him a 3. It would have been a 1 or a 2 prior to his last game, but he really showed what he can do when he's played in his actual position. I'm not sure about his prospects long term. I think he's got next year to prove himself, but he definitely gave himself and the coaches something to think about going into next year with that Gold Coast performance. And I mean, look, he tears up his VFL. It's just like it's broken record stuff, but the majority of these players that find themselves on an AFL list are there because they've got talent. It's just whether or not they can do it. Take that from VFL level and translate that to AFL level. So that's the challenge for him, but it's also just around opportunity. I just don't know how much opportunity he's going to get over the coming years. 34, Jackson Archer. Added 5 games to his 3 that he played last year. Averaged 8.4 disposals, 2.4 marks, 1.6 tackles per game, but I thought showed that he has some great game sense at times. He did break into the side late. It was round 18. He played from round 18 to round 22, and then missed the last couple of games. I think with Zeeble and Hall retiring, Griffin Logue out for most of the year, possibly Mackay leaving, there's definitely spots up for grabs in the back line next year. We've seen Goda and Bergman play through there. I think it's going to be interesting to see what that defensive line looks like next year. But at 187 centimetres, he can't play on the bigs. He's too small. But he certainly can handle the smalls and the mediums. He's quite agile for his size. Quite quick. So I think he's developing okay. He's going to need to continue to work on his defensive capabilities, and his kicking can be a bit erratic as well. I think that's something that he needs to work on if he's going to play that sort of rebounding defender. It's just around precision and reading where to kick it. But I think in terms of reading where the ball's going to go, he typically is quite good at that. That does seem to come naturally to him. he didn't get a heap of opportunity. So I've given him a 3. I thought he played okay in the VFL. It's really hard to judge defenders sometimes, particularly based on the stats sheet. He's just missing that big look at me game, something to, really stamp himself. But I think, as I said, some of that defensive work can sometimes go unnoticed potentially. So yeah, 3 for Jackson. I thought he was okay, but we'll definitely be looking to see more from him next year. Then I've got a couple of quick ones. 33, Braden George. I've just given him a not applicable. He's been recovering from injury all year. Didn't play any AFL or VFL footy, so can't really score him at all. Certainly going to be some big expectations on him next year, given he was the pick 26 from last year's draft, and he's another medium forward onto that pile. So he's just going to keep seeing what we can do and whether or not, who of that lot's going to stay in the team long term. But not applicable for Braden. I really can't give him a score based on his year. And then 32, Jacob Edwards. I've given him a 0. He played VFL all year, or he was either in the VFL team or not playing at all. He doesn't look like it. He's never been close to an AFL game. He's been on the list for 2.5 years because he was one of those mid-season draft picks from back a couple of years. It just seems like we part ways with him. He doesn't score any goals. He doesn't rack up many possessions in the VFL. It's just he doesn't have that game sense or awareness like other players and like a ruckman needs to. He's 202 centimetres. He was always a project player. I don't expect to see him on the list next year, despite the attributes that he has. It just doesn't seem like he's got it at AFL or VFL level, to be honest. 31, Josh Goda. Played a bit early, played a bit late. 10 games total, averaged 14 disposals, 4.6 marks, 1.3 tackles per game. Battled a couple of injuries, and he did look hampered at times, but showed some glimpses of why he was drafted. He had a fantastic round 24 game against the Gold Coast, like many of his teammates, where he had 22 disposals and 7 marks and was really moving it out of that defense with aggression and kicking it well. He also had 15 or more disposals 5 other times, so he can find the footy. Was a bit erratic at times with his kicking. I can think of some real howlers that he's kicked. I'm thinking of the second Essendon game where he shanked a couple or made a couple of errors. But by the same token, he has some real sumptuous hits as well. So it's just finding that consistency for Goats, I think. Another pre-season, staying fit is going to be key for him, but I do think Clarko rates him highly, and he's a great height at 190 centimetres, so plenty of potential. I expect to see him, playing and the coach giving him some patience next year. I've given him a 4, a couple of decent games, but yeah, those injuries really hurt him, but I think he showed enough to make me think he could be a good rebounding defender in the years to come. I'm thinking of an Aaron Mullett or a Jamie McMillan type, something like that at least. So, yeah, I think a solid season, not quite a pass mark, but close for Josh. Charlie Comben, number 30, and yeah, he's such an interesting player to analyse. It's hard to believe he's only played 9 career games. 7 of them came this year. He played 1 last year and 1 the year before. Prior to his season-ending injury against Melbourne, I thought he'd been building a great CV for his year, playing alongside Larkey, pinch hitting in the ruck. He's averaged 8 disposals, 2.5 marks, 3 tackles, 2 hit-outs a game. The numbers aren't great, but I think all North Melbourne supporters could see that potential was finally starting to show, and he was starting to clunk a couple. He just needs to hit the scoreboard more. From his 7 games, 4 of those were goalless. He twice kicked one goal, twice kicked 2 goals. Once kicked 2 goals. And as I said, he needs to work on his hands. He gets his hands to so many balls, but he wasn't able to clunk them like I'm sure he would like to. So, look, massive raps on him going into next year. One of him or Coleman Jones need to stamp themselves as that second tall in the forward line. And I think Coleman has the chance to do that. I gave him a 4. And if not for injury, he was on track for a much better score. So we just need to see him replicate his performance from the gather round against the Lions. That was probably his best game, and try and replicate that. He kicked 2 goals, 3 on that day, and yeah, he just needs to hit the scoreboard and start taking marks. So a 4 for Charlie. I really hope that he's able to stay fit. Number 29, Will Phillips. Shocker of a year last year with his double glandular fever. Wasn't able to play, but played 16 games this year, which is the same amount that he played in his debut, but I thought was a significant improvement from that. He averaged 18.8 disposals, 1.8 marks, 4.1 tackles, and pretty much 4 clearances per game. All of those were better than in 2021. Had some great in-under games, some games where he faded out or he kind of struggled to impact, but yeah, he definitely improved. 5 games with 20 or more disposals, and some real standout games in there. The Pies, he had 29 disposals. Essendon, the first game, he had 27 disposals, 8 clearances and a goal. The Saints, he had 20 touches and 11 tackles. That last game of the year against the Suns, he had 26 disposals. So he was starting to find the footy and really, work on that handballing out from the pack, and when he's in and under. He just seemed to get dropped unexpectedly a couple of times throughout the year, which obviously says that he wasn't doing something that the coaches were looking for him to be doing. But I didn't think he dropped his head. I thought he was fantastic, or he seemed to have a really fantastic attitude about it. And I do think that he's really highly rated at North. So I gave him a 5. I thought he was a pass mark. He showed that, similar to Charlie Lazaro, if he is attending centre bounces and playing as a midfielder, he can be a weapon. Needs to work on his consistency with his kicking, because I think he is a great kick, but I think when he's under pressure and feeling the heat, it sometimes lets him down. But another preseason will mean that he's able to run out games better. I did think that he faded, and I have to think that a lot of that's just due to his lack of fitness from what last year looked like. And also, we have to remember he was drafted at the end of 2020, so he really didn't play much footy in that year either due to COVID. So yeah, 5 for Willfield. I thought he was just a pass. Couple of players left for this pod. Kane Turner, 28. Whew, here we go. So 12 games. He played rounds 1 to 4 and then rounds 20 to 24. Averaged 9.6 disposals, 3 marks, 3 tackles, and he kicked 2 goals for the year. And look, to be honest, other than the tackling, the bumping, the smothering, he found it difficult to impact games. And I think part of that was the reason, or a big part of that was why he was dropped mid-season. And we know that he's great at those 1%ers. He had, I don't have the smother stats in front of me, but I know that he would have been averaging probably more than a smother per game, or close to a smother, which is quite remarkable. I thought he was better when he came back, and I think, some of those stats around his tackling in particular was much better in his second go round, but yeah, I mean, just similar to all of our small, medium forwards, the scoreboard impact was lacking, and he floated in and out of games. As I said, only 2 goals, 2 points. Really not enough considering he played 12 games. And we know that he's got great defensive intensity, but you've got to be able to bring something else. At 27 years of age, he should be one of our better, more consistent players, just based on our list profile. And he's not, unfortunately. He is a fan whipping boy, but he must be doing some things right, as the coach has rated him well enough for him to play 12 games. I've got no idea if he'll be on the list next year. I think he'd be lucky to be, but look, you never know. I thought in the second half of the year, some of those games showed that at least he could consistently bring that defensive effort, and he was able to get involved a bit more offensively. I gave him a 3 for his season. If we're sticking him around, we know it's for that leadership and mature age depth, and it's really hard on the outside to know what he brings during the week. I don't think that his skill set is super well suited to modern footy. I prefer to see the younger forwards getting a crack next year, but look, we'll see. He's been on the list for about 10 years now, and although he started so brightly and had a decent kind of middle period, I do think he's faded the last couple of years and just been another one of those kind of, at another club, I'm not sure that he gets a game, unfortunately. But a 3 for Kane. 27, Miller Bergman, 12 games for the year, averaged 11.4 disposals, 3.5 marks, 1.1 tackles. And to be honest, he was consistently an okay performer earlier in the year. After round 16, he only played that round 24 game, so obviously fell out of a bit of favour the second half. But generally, he was a solid defender. He made great decisions coming out of defence. He was often under pressure and was able to hit targets. I think similar to Josh Goda, he's going to get lots of opportunities next year. And 189, he's that similar thing to Jackson Archer and to Goats. He's not big enough to play on the bigs, but can certainly play small or medium. Like Callan Dawson, maybe needs to put on a bit of weight. Well, he does need to put on a bit of weight long term. I think not a heap, but he's going to need to put something on. He played in all of our wins, and I think another preseason, he potentially could be a more impactful player. And the other part about him is he makes great decisions coming out of defence. I think we're going to need him to try and bite off some more of those trickier kicks that are potentially going to get the ball moving forward, because we saw a bit of that in the last game, and we're going to need to see more of that, I think. I gave him a 5, similar to Wilfield. I think a positive development story from the year without, lighting the world on fire. I thought he was solid and developed, and I think he'll look to cement a spot for next year. He was in and out a little bit, so he'll be looking to really shore up his place in the side. Taron Thomas, number 26, a really hard one to evaluate. Obviously missed the first half of the year due to his off-field discretions, and then played the last 12 games, averaging 19.6 disposals, 2.6 marks, 4.6 tackles, 4.3 clearances, and about a goal a game. Had some fantastic games playing more forward. Twice he kicked 3 goals and twice he kicked 2. Had some fantastic tackling games, sort of with 7 or 8 or 9 tackles, and really looked back to his 2021 form, or even better than his 2021 form, I thought at times, after an indifferent 2022, and we sort of know about why that might have been the case. I just, we'd love to have one of him playing forward and one of him playing midfield, and potentially even one of him playing in the back line. But we can only put him on one spot, so maybe he's that kind of dusty Jordan De Goey, 50% of both. But we really do need him in both places, I think, because at times he looks like an absolutely elite midfielder, and his clearance work can be really, really damaging. But also around the forward line, it's clinical. Really, if he gets an opportunity, he takes it. So looking forward to building a full season into him next year, and we can see what he looks like. But I mean, look, his attitude, his body language is a bit of a watch for next year, because that was an issue last year, and obviously then he went into the off season and made some errors, and yeah, we really want to try and stamp that out. I gave his season a 7, which probably seems quite generous, but the footy that he played in the second half of the year, I thought he was probably arguably our best player after he came back. He really can play anywhere except the ruck, and yeah, I mean, coming into next year, I'll be expecting big things. To use the NBA parlance, it's a contract year. So sure, he's said he's going to stick around for next year, and I hope that we can sign him long term if he wants to be there. But I'm assuming that he's going to want some big money, so he's going to need to show that he's worth it next year. 25, Paul Curtis, last couple. I thought it was a solid but unremarkable second year for Paul. 21 games, averaged 9.5 disposals, 2.6 marks, 2.3 tackles, 0.8 goals, so not quite a goal a game. And I don't think he made that leap from last year. He had some standout performances. He had that goal of the year contender against the Swans, which I think the voting's just closed on, but certainly he was nominated one of the 3 nominations for goal of the year, and that really showed he has that brilliance that he can do. He loves a fend off. He has that brilliance in him. He kicked 4 goals against the Eagles late in the year, which was pretty special, and he really probably should have had 5 or 6 in that match. And he was really good in the last game against the Gold Coast. He was, assisting Larky and getting the ball moving forward. Unfortunately, he just has too many goalless games. So of his 21, he had 10 that he was goalless in. And early in the year, he wasn't tackling super well. So when he came back into the side, I thought he improved, and that's something that he can continue to improve, because you've got to have that defensive pressure if you're a small forward. The other thing that he needs to work on, I think, is his discipline. Because 27 frees against and only 7 frees for. Look, some of that's going to be bad luck, but I do think that he often gives away free kicks in contests when he doesn't need to, and can be caught holding the ball when he just goes for one too many fend-offs. So he's got stuff to work on. Overall, I thought this is a bit of a product of his great debut season. He just didn't take a leap, but he was probably a slight improvement on last year. I gave him a 5. He is going to need to build, but he should hit that 50-game mark next year, and that's when I think it's fair to have some real expectations around him. He's still on 36, so yeah, halfway through next year, or just over halfway through next year, he'll hit 50, and that's when I think we'll be hoping to see some consistency in goals output from him. And last player for this podcast, Tom Powell, number 24. An up and down year for him with form and a couple of minor injuries. 14 games, averaged 16.4 disposals, 2.8 marks, 1.9 tackles. Kicked 7 goals for the year. Struggled for opportunity in the midfield, so similar to Lazaro. Although he did play more games than Lazaro, it was just that he was often in that half-forward flank and he wasn't able to have the impact. In round 24, when he played mostly midfield, he looked fantastic, had 23 disposals and 5 tackles, and that handballing that we know he can do so well, he was back at that. He only cracked 20 disposals 4 times this year and struggled to have scoreboard impact when playing forward. He did have one game where he was able to kick 2 goals against the Dogs, and I think he kicked them pretty quickly back to back, and we thought, gee, hang on, maybe he can play forward, but he wasn't able to do that consistently. Also played off at half back a couple of times, so he really needs to develop his craft in other areas of the ground. I just don't know that he's going to find his way into the midfield pecking order. But year 4 next year, so he's going to need to start hitting his straps either way and try and secure a consistent game. As I said, played 14 this year. He played 18 last year and 13 in 2021, so he's always in that on the fringe, in and out kind of vibe, and he just needs to use that handballing strength and chain up through the middle. That's what we want to see. I could see him playing on a wing too, like I talked about with 84. It doesn't have to be an out-and-out on-baller, but I think he needs to be playing through the middle of the ground. I also gave Tom Powell a 5, so did just enough, but similar to Curtis, I think we know the potential's there from previous seasons, and I just think we want to see more of it. So just a pass from Powell, but certainly looking to see more from him next year. So that is all of the updates for this week. I'll just summarise the players that we've evaluated so far. So not applicable, Braden George. A 0 for Jacob Edwards. I haven't given anyone a 1 yet. With a 2, Hamish Free, Flynn Perez, Robert Hansen Jr. and Phoenix Spicer. So yeah, you'd think from a lot of those we're going to see some delistings, potentially Spicer, Perez, Edwards in particular. I gave 3, Callan Dawson, Blake Drury, Cooper Harvey, Charlie Lazaro, Jackson Archer and Kane Turner. So again, some younger players there that probably didn't show the development that we were hoping for this year. 4, Aaron Hall, Tristan Sherry, Josh Goda, Charlie Comben. 5, Will Phillips, Miller Bergman, Paul Curtis, Tom Powell. So that middle group of younger players that I thought did show something this year. 6, Cam Zerha and Eddie Ford. And 7, Taron Thomas. So that is the first half of the playing list. We'll have a look at the second half of the list next week, and I'll go through a full summary. But yeah, at this stage from that group, Taron Thomas, I think it's fair to say was the best player from that batch. Obviously have some absolute jets in that second round that we'll get to, like Sheasel and Larky and LDU. So plenty of good players to come, but yeah, that's the first half. I'm just going to go through some real quick fire items now before I wrap up the podcast. I don't want this to go for too long, and some of these I actually covered last week in the chat with Dean and Josh, so you go back and listen in a bit more detail to that podcast if you're interested. Crashed out of the VFL finals, lost by 100 odd points, so unfortunately the whole club, men's club, is done for the year. We weren't able to win through in that wildcard round, so they are out. I read this morning that, or I think it was this afternoon, Gavin Brown and John Blakey are not going to be at the club next year as assistant coaches. I think there'll be a few people that are happy to see the back of Gavin Brown just based on the development of our players lately. But yeah, it's interesting. I think it's a bit of Clarko starting to stamp his authority a bit more so on the club. And with that, it was announced last week that Ratton's also going to leave. He was only part-time, but looks like he's going to seek some opportunities elsewhere and potentially not in footy. So that's fair enough. Haven't got any listings to talk about yet. Wondering if we're going to wait until the best and fairest or what's going to happen there. But yeah, nothing to announce yet. And then, yeah, I mean, it was good to see Eddie Ford acknowledged in that last round with a Rising Star nomination. Obviously, fantastic to see Nick Larkey win an All-Australian spot. That was super surprising, but fantastic for him. Sheasel winning the Rising Star, fantastic, and best first-year player, I think he was, and most disposals in a season by a first-year player ever. So a tremendous achievement from Shees. Speaking of Shees, I've been speaking to someone on Instagram, Reece Delaney, and a friend of his is an artist. So this is an absolute plug that Reece has asked for. HayleySavageArt.com.au is where you can go, and there's a artwork of, I guess it's a mashup between Harry Sheasel and Cheezels. So an absolute stunning piece of art if you're looking for some North Melbourne merch, I guess. I'll say it again, it's HayleySavageArt.com.au. Hayley spelled Hayley. Check it out. Yeah, it's really cool. It's a nice piece of artwork and something that you could add to your collection if you're a bit of a North Nuffy like me. And lastly, the AFLW, I mentioned it off the top, 66-6 winners over Carlton. It looks like at one point we were going to keep them absolutely scoreless. And then as soon as the commentators mentioned that was on the cards, obviously Carlton kicked a goal. But yeah, it was a fantastic performance from the ladies. That tall forward line with Sheila and King and Randall looks really hard to stop. So I am starting to learn a lot more about some of those other players. Sheila obviously has come across from St Kilda, so I hadn't seen much of her. Garner and Riddell were just ball magnets again. They were fantastic. I think they both had 36 touches. Bresnahan and Carney were great in defence. They really mopped everything up. So yeah, it's been a great start to the season for the women, the AFLW. I think it's really looking like they're in that premiership window, which is fantastic because we know the men's team are not close at the moment. So another dominant performance. We've got Geelong on Friday. I think it's like 5 o'clock, so it's a pretty early game, but I assume that's so it doesn't clash with the semi-final of the men's game. Get along. I think Geelong is got the 2 wins as well so far, so should be a bit more competitive potentially, and we've certainly got some tough matches like the one coming up against Melbourne later in the year. So there will be challenges for us, but a fantastic start. We're sitting top. Our percentage is like 500. You love to see it. And that is it for the podcast. My voice is failing me. I really had plenty to say. So as I said, next week I'll go through the second half of the list. We'll talk about the AFLW game and if there's any other news to arise from the week, we'll mention it. But yeah, we'll continue with our player review. And hope everyone has a fantastic week. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Stay out of trouble. And I will speak to you next week. As I always say, go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. Please subscribe to the podcast on your app and give me a rating or a review if you can. I'd really appreciate it. You can find me on all social media at NorthPod Show. That's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Threads, you name it, I'm there. I'll see you next episode.